Hello and welcome to Helpline on Feed, Play, Love. Today we are joined by paediatric nurse and sleep consultant Jo Ryan. And Jo is here to help you with whatever questions you might have. You've got a number of ways you can ask your questions on Helpline. Today, if you're joining us live on Facebook, you can pop your questions below. And if you're listening via the podcast, the best way is to email us at helpline@theparentbrand.com.au. Hello, Jo. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you.
Nice and warm in not so sunny Melbourne.
It's a very cold and overcast Melbourne day today.
It's a nice time to be inside.
That's right, indeed.
Well, let's start on some of the questions we have. The first one we have is from Michelle. She says, my eldest will be 3 in October, and for the last couple of months, he has begun really pushing back on all the boundaries, as well as ask a million why questions. The behaviour we are most unhappy with is screaming and hitting or screaming and kicking. Both of these are done in anger and cause his 9-month-old brother to cry. I know in theory that as parents we are to remain calm, but these actions of our sons in particular make hubby and I get even more upset and impatient. What kind of discipline strategies or consequences should we be using to deter this behaviour? I feel like we've tried everything, role playing when we're all calm, explaining threats of consequence and actioning these, taking him to a different area to calm down, removing what he was screaming for, etc. And know that us getting upset is making my son's tantrums worse. In case it helps the above, he also seems to be transitioning out of his day nap. Some days he takes it, some days he doesn't. He is usually a good sleeper, but has now been either resisting bedtime or nap time, or waking at night or waking too early, etc. His usual weekly routine is daycare Monday to Wednesday, home Thursday to Sunday. He wakes around 6 or 7. His nap is around 12:30 or 1. And it's 1.5 hours most days, but sometimes only 45 minutes to an hour. In bed by 7:30, although we've started trialling 8 p.m. in case he needs more awake time. He eats well for all meals and snacks and has a cup of milk before each sleep and when he wakes in the morning. So any advice on that?
Yeah, well, it's really very common. So, firstly, I would say don't think that there's something unusual about him. 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds are really designed to assert their independence. That's where they are developmentally and brain development wise. So, his way of, tantrums or screaming is his way of expressing his dislike or, his feeling. And remember that toddlers can't express themselves, like they don't understand feelings and they're overwhelmed by them. So often they will respond sort of in a way that's for us like a negative response, like screaming or crying or saying no. It also sounds to me like he's probably a bit tired if he's transitioning out of, to dropping his day nap. So instead of putting him down later in the evening, I would actually be trying to put him down a bit earlier, because remember that we need them to get a really beautiful night's sleep, and they get the deepest sleep of the night in the evening period. So you don't want to kind of shorten that period of the night. But look, it sounds like she's doing all the right things in terms of, dealing with this behavior. I guess it's just understanding it and just being able to kind of live with it a bit more. Sort of, I wouldn't be punishing or sort of, that sort of thing, because often they don't have control of what they're doing, and it's his. And so for us, it's about saying, okay, I can see my little person is in distress. They're not able to work out whatever it is that they're trying to work out, and maybe I can help them. So how can I help them? And also just sort of naming the emotion. Like, I can see you're angry, I can see you're distressed, I can see you're, because they don't know those words, they don't associate those words with what they're feeling, and often they can't do that till they're quite a bit older. But just being able to say that and repeat and repeat and repeat. And obviously if there's behavior that's unacceptable, there is a consequence for that. Like, I don't like you hitting your brother, or that's not acceptable behavior. So you remove that from him, or you move him away from that. But I guess just kind of supporting him through it, understanding that he's upset, but also reinforcing that that's not what we do when we're upset. This is what we do, or come and, and give him a hug. And rather than kind of alienating them or timing them out or moving them away, it's better to take them in and kind of just reassure him that you understand him and you can see that he's upset. But no, you can't have that right now, and I understand that's upsetting to you, but that's the way it is now. And, he will grow out of it. It is a very trying time, though. It's very, very trying. And
Oh, yes.
maintain your patience is hard. So if you do lose it occasionally, don't beat yourself up about it. That's normal behavior as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question comes from Stanley on Facebook. My toddler isn't talking as much. She understands words but can't manage to put sentences together. What do you suggest?
Well, I don't know how old they are, a toddler, so it could be any age. I mean, language is something that comes, at different speeds for different children as well. So, and often if she's like part of a large family, often they don't feel the need to speak, or they don't need to speak because everyone's speaking for them on their behalf. And some children just take a little bit longer for it to sort of all, click into place. I mean, there are certain things that measures, like, that you can say by this age they should have this many words. And, I would suggest, if you're concerned, that I would speak to your GP, about that, and perhaps get a referral to see a speech pathologist or someone, just so that they, can get her assessed. But, again, I wouldn't, I sort of don't like to medicalize a lot of this stuff, because I think that often it's just your child. Everyone, they're all different and unique. And, if everything's going along and, she's okay and she's understanding and she's not, not saying anything, I would sort of try to just see how many words she's saying. And as long as she's saying some things,
Sentences, not right? Because I don't.
Yeah,
My kids,
sentences.
2 and 3-year-olds, they weren't.
No, they don't string sentences together, particularly no more than 2 or 3 words, till they're quite a bit older. So, yeah, but like I say.
I was just going to say, probably what will happen, Stanley, is you'll be saying she's not stringing sentences together, and before you know it, she'll shut up. And
That's
you'll be
exactly
like,
right.
why is I worried?
I know. Yes, that's true. That's true.
But good luck. I'm sure they're fine. But like, as Joe said, if you're worried, just get it checked with the GP. But it's very normal.
Very normal.
Yeah. And they never stop talking. Speaking from my own experience, this is a question from Michelle, who sent a question to our Facebook. She says, hi, Joe, I have a little 10-week-old who will not sleep. 2 issues. 1, she hates being put down or in her bassinet. 2, she has a very short sleep cycle. How can I get her to stay in her bassinet? We have tried everything. On the off chance that we do get her to fall asleep in there, the moment she wakes up after 20 minutes, there is nothing we can do to get her to settle back down in there, and end up having to pick her up. Even in our arms, she rouses after that time and is hard to get back to sleep. My first 2 were not like this. That's from Michelle.
So, okay, so there's a few things that you can look at. 10 weeks, so that's right in the middle of the catnapping sort of phase, which usually starts around 8 to 10 weeks. So they start to shorten their naps. That's just a natural developmental thing. Getting her to fall asleep in her cot, obviously, if she's very used to falling asleep in your arms, then she's not going to want to do that, because, I mean, who doesn't want to fall asleep in their, someone's arms when they're a tiny baby, all wrapped up nice and cuddly? But also look at how long she's been awake for, because if babies are too tired when they go down, they definitely won't want to do it on their own, and they will shorten their nap. So at 10 weeks, I would really only be keeping her up for an hour to an hour and a half maximum, particularly the first one of the day, an hour, and then maybe pushing it out to an hour and a half for the rest of the day. But I would work on just getting her to fall asleep in the cot, even if she then wakes after 20 minutes and you have to pick her up and put her back to sleep in your arms. I would work on the falling asleep in the cot, because then once the developmental kind of catnapping phase passes, at least that might start to click it more into place, and then she should maybe elongate her naps naturally. But that's what I sort of tend to say to people to focus on. You can certainly try to resettle after that 20 to 30-minute nap in the cot. But if you have to pick her up, 20-minute naps are not long enough, so she needs to have a little bit longer. So whether that's in your arms, if that's what you have to do, then that's okay. But like I say, really work on getting her to fall asleep in the cot, and make sure she's not too overtired when she goes down. Make sure she's got a nice full tummy of milk, that she's had a burp, and all those lovely things, and keep the environment as conducive to sleep as you can.
Good luck with that, Stanley. Oh, sorry, who was that? Michelle.
Sure. Yeah.
Good luck, Michelle. We have a question from Stevie on Facebook. My 2.5-year-old and 5-year-old don't sleep past 4:30 or 5:30 a.m. Do you have any recommendations on how to get them to sleep better? Also, both are coming in my bed during the night and both wiggle and are restless all night. Help. I imagine Stevie is not getting much sleep.
No, poor Stevie. Yeah, look, 4:30 is way too early. 5:30 is kind of acceptable. I think some young children, that's just their natural wake time, and it might even be 5. Particularly boys, I find, are more prone to being early morning risers. That's just the way they are. But as long as they're going to bed and they're sleeping that whole night through, which it sounds like is not happening in Stevie's household. So I think the thing is, make sure they're going to bed not too late, because when they're overtired again, they tend to wake during the night. Make sure they're going to bed around 7 and asleep about 7-ish, that they're falling asleep on their own without you in the room with them, because if you're in the room with them, they expect you to be there every time their little eyes flick open, and if you're not there, they'll wake right up and call out for you. And then when they do wake, maybe you go to them and settle them for a couple of nights, rather than bring them into you, because, maybe you just need to reestablish that whole pattern, that there is no reward for waking, there is no getting into mummy's bed. And then often that will they'll stop waking because they're like, oh, well, what's the point? But it is you do have to do it for a couple of nights and try to, change that routine around the wake so that they don't expect to get into your bed, because if they do, they will just keep waking, because who doesn't want to get into mummy and daddy's bed, in the middle of the night?
What are your thoughts on reward charts? Because I have an 8-year-old who responds well to reward charts when it comes to sleep.
Charts are great. And when we talk about reward, I sort of think like maybe just a star or a sticker or something, nothing sort of, sort of materialistic, I guess. You can have a big reward at the end, and often I encourage that to be more an experience, like let's go to the zoo, or let's ride on a ferry, or let's do something like that. But I think for young children, 2.5 and 3.5, the 3.5-year-old, it might work better, but the 2.5-year-old just would not get it. Yeah, they'd be like, don't care.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Good luck, Stevie. This is an email from Rachel. I would love any suggestions regarding my 16-month-old boy-girl twins and their day sleep, which has gone very pear-shaped. The issue is that mostly they are not getting 2 hours in, and I feel this would be the minimum they should have at this age, ? The routine is as follows. The girl usually wakes around 6:15, but we never get the twins out of bed until 7. The boy stays asleep, however. My oldest 3-year-old wakes every time. My partner and I have to both get up and showered ready for work, so we cannot get them up earlier than 7. They have breakfast when they wake, then a snack at 9, lunch 11:30, nap around 12:15. They're usually asleep by 12:30 and they self-settle. The girl always wakes at 1:30 and doesn't resettle. We try to keep her in bed till 2 so she's synced with the boy, and so we can encourage more sleep, but she never resettles. Sometimes the boy wakes up at 1:40 or 10 to 2 and doesn't resettle. They both apparently do 2 hours at daycare, and they will often wake him on our request at 2 hours. So the boy must love sleep. We found if he sleeps past 2 hours, he's up having a party around 3 to 4 a.m. Then they have afternoon tea around 3, dinner 5:30, bath 6, bed 7. Sometimes they settle within 15 minutes at night. Sometimes they need a pat and their comforters thrown back in their cot. Unless they are unwell or teething, they usually sleep through. Would love any suggestions as to how to extend that day sleep. 1 hour doesn't seem long enough.
Yeah, look, it's probably not, but like again, you're trying to, it's very hard with twins, particularly boy-girl twins, because they're very different and their brains work differently and they require probably different amounts of sleep. So trying to keep them on exactly the same routine can be difficult. The fact that she's waking earlier too, I would suggest that perhaps by 12 she's a bit more tired than he is. And so maybe that's why she's shortening her nap a little, because she's going down a bit too tired. But it's hard to know, because maybe that's all she does need, you know, particularly if she's sleeping through the night. You know, she's going to bed at a good hour, 7 o'clock, asleep by 7-ish. That's really great. You know, the only thing I would suggest is you could try bringing bedtime a little bit earlier, but then you'd have to bring both their bedtime earlier, nap time in the day a bit earlier. Then you'd have to move both of their nap times a bit earlier. It'd be interesting to know what time they go down at daycare, whether that's kind of in sync to what they're doing at home. But remember, daycare is very, you know, exhausting. There's a lot of activities, so they're often quite exhausted when they go down. But you know, that it's really common for children to sleep differently at childcare than they do at home. They often sleep worse at home than they do at childcare. You know, that's just the way it is. But you know, the other things, make sure she's got a nice big full tummy, that she's having maybe some food before she goes down, if that's what's happening at childcare as well. But otherwise, I mean, there's not a lot. It sounds like the routine's pretty good. You know, there's not a lot else you could do. And maybe that's just it for her for the time being. And if she stays in her cot and she's happy to do that, then, you know, I probably wouldn't worry too much. Sorry, I wish there was a miracle kind of cure, but.
Oh, no, I think the sleeping through at night is a brilliant start. I mean, not
particularly for twins,
that,
you know.
Yeah, she must be doing really well to set it up like that.
Yeah.
Well, good luck anyway, Rachel, and I hope that helps. I mean, what I guess basically in answer to your question, 1 hour doesn't seem long enough. I guess really what you're saying, Jo, is that sometimes with some babies it is. So maybe look at the at her behavior around that sleep time.
Totally. Like, is she okay for the rest of the afternoon? Does she get tired and cranky earlier? You know, and if so, then maybe you could put her down maybe 15 minutes before, you know, your son, and see if that makes any difference. You know, I mean, for the daytime nap, you know, but if you can do that, see, then that's tricky as well.
Yeah. Jo, our next question comes from Kristen on Facebook. She says, my 10-month-old wakes at 3 a.m. for resettling, then up at 5 a.m. He will not resettle. My 2.5-year-old now wakes around 6:30 because his brother is up. The youngest is still in our room because of this. I can't let the youngest cry it out because he wakes everyone. So I guess they're saying what to do with the 10-month-old that gets up so early.
At 5. So I'd be interested to know, is she feeding at 3? Or what's she doing at 3 when he wakes?
Because if you can pop that in, that would be
otherwise I would say maybe give him a feed at 5, you know, and see if that gets him back to sleep, you know, rather than feeding earlier. So resettle at 3, which might take a while for a couple of nights, but then hopefully he'll get into the habit of just sleeping through till 5-ish, even if it's 4:30. Then I would feed at that time, and that might help with those early morning wakes. Generally by 10 months, you know, he may not need the feed at all. So you could try dropping that, but then that might cause the 5 a.m. wakes anyway. So it's hard. It's a hard early morning wakes. That's why I tend to like to do the feed around 4:35 if you can. Just because they'll have a big full feed and often they'll go back to sleep and they'll just get through that kind of, it's a very wakeful time of the night. They're in a very wakeful period of their sleep cycles. So, but if you can do a big feed and then get them back to sleep, often that will help with that period, and he might go through till 6 or 6:30, which would be brilliant.
A lot of early mornings today.
I know. Yeah. And it's hard because it's winter. I think everyone's probably like, oh, I can't face it.
So tough. Oh, look, I couldn't handle it in summer either, but you're right. Winter does not make it easier.
No.
This question comes from Liv. She says, my bub will be 8 months in 1 week. We've read all your books, Joe, and attempting to follow your principles. We've had lots of setbacks though, as the bub has silent reflux. Is it okay to give Bub a dummy for naps, but not nighttime, or is this confusing? We offer for naps as he generally manages to keep the dummy in his mouth, and it's the only way we've ever managed more than one sleep cycle without the movement of the pram, etc. Whereas I thought the dummy overnight would be a sleep aid, which he still isn't able to control.
Did you say he was 8 weeks?
8 months.
8 months. Okay, so look, babies with reflux, excuse me, often like the dummy. The dummy can actually be helpful because they're kind of swallowing more often. So it keeps things down. So look, I think if you're using the dummy for the naps and it's helping, then I don't think it's a problem. Overnight, yeah, try to avoid it if you can, because at this age, often it will fall out and they will cause them to wake up, and they don't have the kind of dexterity to find it and put it back in their mouth yet. But I don't think it's a problem at this stage. If it's not causing any problems, then I think it's fine.
Okay.
And in fact, it might be helpful. Yeah.
Rachel from the Helpline group says, hi, Siobhan and Joe. My daughter is nearly 2.5. She's always been a wonderful night sleeper, but has resisted naps unless we're driving, basically since she was a few months old. She transitioned to a toddler bed at about 2 years after getting frustrated in the cot because she likes to sleep with her arms spread and the cot wasn't wide enough. Our nighttime routine is dinner, bath, books, then bed. We had the routine down at 7:30, pushing out to 8 p.m. But for the last few months, she's taking up to 2 hours to fall asleep, which means she's falling asleep after 9 and sometimes as late as 9:30, 10. She sleeps through until 7:30, 8:30 a.m. She seems to get active after the bath, and she wastes time playing, hiding, putting toys to sleep, tidying, or reading an inordinate number of books. I often can't get her to sit down to read, so I read to myself until she joins me. I try to limit it to 2 books, but some nights cutting her off leads to hysterical tantrums, which I feel is counterproductive. Other than that, she's generally calm. She just seems not ready to go to sleep. My husband and I swap out as needed and depending on how she is responding to us. We stay with her in the room until she falls asleep. We've experimented with dropping naps on weekends with some success as she falls asleep within the hour, usually before 8 p.m. and sleeps through until 7:30. She's at daycare 5 days a week where she naps for about 40 to 90 minutes from 12:30. We tried reintroducing the cot, but she kept waking herself from hitting the sides. We've got our second baby due in August, so it's not really viable to be taking upwards of 2 hours to get her to sleep. I don't get home until 6:30, so bringing the routine forward is not really an option. Any suggestions for how we can tighten the routine would be helpful.
Okay, so I would look at the day nap. Okay, so I would cap it at maybe 45 minutes. So don't let her have more than that. Because it sounds like on the weekend where they said they've experimented with not doing a day nap and she's going to bed earlier. And some baby or toddlers just don't need it. They're ready to drop it. I know it sort of sounds like, oh my God, I need to have that nap, but let her have just 45 minutes, okay? I would also start to set up the night routine slightly differently so that you're not staying in the room with her, because that just creates a whole, oh, let's do this, mummy, let's do that, daddy, and it sort of becomes a bit of a playtime. So, and she's going to be resistant at first, obviously, but if you just set it up. So I like to, with this age children, you could certainly say, I'm going to stay in here for a minute and then I'm going to go and put the garbage out, but I'm going to come back. So you need to stay in bed. So you use an excuse to leave the room and you always come back. And I would start it off with like staying out of the room for say 30 seconds, very short period of time, because we want to build up her trust. So we don't want her coming out and following you. If she does, you take her back and you say, no, I need to go and do this thing, but I will be back in a minute to check on you. Okay. And so you keep doing that. You build up, you stay out for a very short period of time on night 1, 30 seconds, come back in, praise, great, good girl for staying in bed. I'm going to sit here for a minute, but then I need to go and take my shoes off, so out you go, but I'm going to come back. Okay, so you stay in bed. So out you go for 30 seconds. You're going to have to come up with a whole lot of excuses for leaving the room. That's the only hard part. I need to go to do a wee. I need to go and, chop the vegetables. I need to go and do this. So you do that, and you always follow through. So you must do what you say you're going to do. I will come back. And like I say, for the first couple of nights, you keep it as very short. And then you might find that you can start to extend it, and you can stay up for 3 minutes, you can stay up for 5 minutes, but always come back. Even if you think she's asleep, just pop your head back in, in case, because they can be a bit hypervigilant, waiting, is she coming back? And that's what can stop them from falling asleep. But if they don't have that anxiety around that, they often will just drop off to sleep. So change the routine. Make sure she's falling asleep without you in the room. Okay, that can help. And try to just, I think, restrict her day naps a little bit so that she's more tired more quickly in the evening. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've got time for one last question. This comes from Danielle. She says, "Hi ladies, I need advice on my son's sleep pattern. He's 8 months on Wednesday. For the past month and a half, he has been waking consistently between 4:30 and 5:30 a.m. Happy, singing, ready to start the day. When he previously was waking between 6:30 and 7. If we leave him to try and settle, he gets increasingly upset. His bedtime has been 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. based off the end of his last nap, and we follow a dinner, solids, bath, milk, bed routine. If we push his bedtime later, he will still have an early waking. He does not do consistent sleep lengths. The longest he has slept for overnight is 11 and a half hours. He's breastfed every 3 to 4 hours during the day and loves his solid food, eating 3 meals a day. His awake times are around 2 3/4 hours. Since 6 months, he's been having more consistent day sleeps ranging from around 60 to 90 minutes in the morning, 60 to 90 minutes over lunch, and a bridging nap of 20 to 40 minutes in the evening. We treat every early morning waking prior to 6 a.m. as a night waking and follow a responsive settling technique of patting and shushing until calm. He will sometimes fall back asleep after an hour or more of settling, but we will usually attempt until 6 a.m. and then get him up for the day. I try not to feed him after 4 a.m. in an attempt to reduce reinforce early waking. However, if he wakes between 12 to 4 a.m., I will feed him on demand. Normally, he will only feed once at night now, if at all. Is there anything I can change to get him sleeping later in the mornings?
Yeah, so it sounds to me that he might be getting a bit too much sleep in the day. So I would cut him back to 2 naps a day. So I would maybe keep him up for a bit longer. So first nap of the day, first wake period, 2 hours. So if he's awake at 6, back down at 8. And then I would try to encourage him to sleep for like an hour to an hour and a half. Next wake period, 2.5 hours. Okay. And then up until bedtime after the second nap. So 2 naps a day. Try to have him the last one of the day, maybe no more than 3 to 3.5 hours awake, asleep by sort of 6:37 if you can. And overnight, I would sort of try not to feed unless it was around 4 o'clock in the morning, 3:34, 4:30. Okay. But if you feel like he doesn't need it at 8 months, he's on solids, he sounds like he's a decent weight. So if he's over 8 kilos, he's 8 months old and he's having 3 meals a day, he shouldn't really need that early morning feed, but it could help. But I would push it out to sort of like 3 to 4 a.m. in the morning. Closer to 4 would be ideal. Otherwise, just resettle. Pat and shush, sounds like you're doing exactly the right thing, but don't feed at the end of a long period of patting and shushing, getting back to sleep. And if he wakes sort of an hour later, then feed, sort of thing. They're the things I would do. And
Brilliant.
hopefully that would help. Yeah.
Well, Jo, that's all we had time for today. Thank you so much for coming on and answering those questions. And if you didn't get a chance to ask your question today, but you would like to have on a one-on-one consultation, that is one that's tailored to your specific needs, you can book Jo through the Babyology Sleep School, and we'll put links on this Facebook Live and also in the podcast show notes on where you can make an appointment with Jo if you would like more time with her. Chris Minogue is in the chair next week on Helpline, so join us live for that on Monday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or catch up on all of the advice through our podcast. You can give us your questions live or via helpline at theparentbrand.com.au. Thanks for all your questions and see you next week.